Hash House and Circle Up.
Welcome to On, the Hash House Harrier podcast for interviews, history, and stories. I'm your host, Ra.
I must admit, I didn't even know you existed, and I've been hashing long enough, and I thought I knew most people, but you're new to my itinerary, so to speak.
I've been hashing at the big international events. I've emceed a lot of them, starting, 96 Cyprus.
Yeah, I was the narrator on the Rocky Horror Show.
Yeah, so I handed you the microphone.
Did you? Oh, shows what a great memory I've got.
And I asked something, and you're like, bugger off, we got this.
Yeah,
I remember that moment.
Yeah, I wrote all the lyrics on that. We altered them from the Rocky Horror Show, which was the best line I ever wrote was, he had the looks and the brains of an Englishman, but the arsehole of an Australian. And that almost stopped the show.
Yeah, that was spectacular.
Got the recording.
Yeah, people still talk about that. That was spectacular. Today on the Hash, we are back in the UK with a longtime hasher. We met on stage in 1996, and he has no memory of ever seeing me in his life before. So there you go. Welcome on the Hash On podcast today, Uncle Gerry. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start with your origin story for hashing. When, where, and how did you get to your first hash?
I got transferred to Singapore in 1970 by my firm, and I've always wanted to fly. When I got to Singapore, they had a flying club on the main airport. My instructor was a guy called John O'Rourke. He's dead now, unfortunately, but he was a very tough character. And one day, we were just waiting to go flying. He was talking to the club steward because he was president. And he said, we've got the Hash House Harriers coming down to use the facilities after a run. I said to him, what's the Hash House Harriers? He said, oh, you're an Englishman. You don't want to worry about this. This is for really tough Australians and Kiwis. And we're not interested in people like you. Of course, that hooked me completely and utterly. At that time, Singapore only had one hash, which was the Monday night men's hash. And he hooked me completely and utterly. And that changed my personality completely because I had no idea the sort of, not screwed up, but shall we say, very tough, demanding attitudes, particularly of the Australian, no prisoners, so to speak. So it taught me to fight my own corner. And even though the hash actually was closed at 120 members, but somehow he managed to wrangle it so I got aboard. And it was great hashing then because in the early 70s, Singapore still had, 50% of the island was either jungle or rubber or palm or swamps or reservoirs. So it was great hashing. So that's how I started.
That's great. Let's review what you recall about the very earliest days. Who else was there? People who'd been hashing maybe for up to 8 years in Singapore by that point, and what it was like. It's hot and sweltering. What time of day? What was the hash traditions in effect by 1970 and so on?
It started at 5:30 on a Monday night. It was without doubt always 38 degrees. Sometimes it was incredibly hot. Other times it hammered with rain, but that didn't change the temperature at all. Trying to remember some of the faces going back all that time is pretty difficult. If I had the old Singapore hash directory, I could probably think of some names, but there was one guy called Clive Lane, Dr. Clive Lane, who was the hash doctor, and he always swore that anybody going on the hash would always outlive most other people by at least 10 years because they were pushing their body much harder than most expatriates in those days who just spent a lot of time just down the club drinking and that sort of thing. But I wish I could think of a few more names going back to that time.
We can look them up, and some of those documents are online. I just wondered if there's any that stood out to you that all these years later, right from the start. Let's talk about what it was like for you to get involved in, like, how long did it take before you knew enough to set a trail and what happened after the hash in terms of what they drank, singing, and stuff like that?
The first one's an easy question because after 6 months hashing, I thought I knew all about it. So I said to John, I'm going to lay a run. So he said, who's your co-hair? I said, I don't need a co-hair. I can go and do it all on my own. He said, you're having a co-hair. And I said, why? He said, because if you get knocked down by the proverbial number 9 bus, we're still going to get our run. After the run, there was a big old truck used to turn up with full of old oil drums, great big blocks of ice, and large bottles of Anchor. Everybody thinks Singapore, it was Tiger. In my day, it was Anchor. We would literally sit on the curbstones by the side of the road or where we were else in the jungle. Pretty well nobody left until all that beer was drunk. Drink and drive laws in those days were if you didn't have a drink, you couldn't drive.
Yeah, that's great. Do you remember with the limitation of the number of hashers that could be active, how did they collect subscriptions?
In terms of subscription, that you had to go on a banker's order, so there was nobody going around, no clutching hands, so to speak, which gave, and that applies the same to Surrey. We've one of the few hashes that got banker's orders, so we always got money in the bank. We don't pester people for fees or anything of that nature. That was an easy one.
While you're sitting on the curb there, was there singing, hash songs, hash t-shirts, and hash names?
No, we're going back to what you were telling me to the hash you went to.
Yes. How was it compared to other hashes you've been in? If somebody was new to hashing today and they went back, although it's a men's hash, how different would it have felt?
In those days, there was no circle. There was no circle at all. And there were no hash names. A few people acquired them by doing daft things. For instance, I was talking about Dr. Clyde Lane. He was the hash doctor, but he was known as Wide Drain because he used to get regularly pissed and he drove his car down into the canal, Bakatima Canal. That's how he got his name. I got my name there because Uncle Gerry, uncle in Chinese terms means a wise one, and always giving advice. I'm always good at giving advice, but that mainly despite people asking for it. But I was going to say, generally, no hash days. Yet, when I've been back to Singapore on numerous occasions, they've now got a circle and songs and punishments and all that sort of stuff. But that was not the case in the early days of Singapore at all. And in fact, I left in late 77. Nothing had changed at all. That was the way it was run.
What about t-shirts, hash, insignia stuff?
Yeah, plenty of t-shirts. I've got lots of them sitting in the loft, mainly in their cellophane, because
wow,
in those days it was mainly expatriates. Expatriates were fairly senior, so their companies normally lost the cost of a t-shirt. Say every couple of weeks you got a new t-shirt.
Before just ask you for any misadventure trails that happened during that first of the 70s, what about write-ups or photographs? Were people taking any pictures ever, and did you have write-ups?
No, not any pictures, but certainly write-ups. They were notorious, in fact, because after the Monday night run, some of us would meet in the Singapore Cricket Club, which is a famous, what was in those days, a colonial club. And we would have a lot of beer, and then we would write the hash notice, and it was pretty rough write-ups. And I would say there's a fair chance we would have got sued today, but they went out on sheets of yellow paper and were put in the mail. There was no other means of contact at all, but that was the way it was done. Just a receding hairline, a write-up, and a few jokes perhaps, and that was about it.
Do you remember any kind of disasters that happened in that stretch then, Singapore, with lost people, in authorities, anything that happened?
Certainly, I can't remember their names, but there were a couple who spent the night out in the jungle and got bitten to hell as a result and were most unhappy about the experience. I certainly got caught out in the jungle a couple of times. Actually, I got myself in a swamp and there was no point in trying to get out because you may just get in deeper. And also, it was very misleading because at night you had fireflies and you thought they were street lamps because you thought, gee, I'm near a kampong or a road or something. On two occasions, I got lost. And in fairness, the first time they came and found me, and that was 11 o'clock at night. I was very pleased about that. The second time, I did actually get out pretty late. When I got back, the car park was empty, but on the top of my car was a bottle of Anchor sitting on the bonnet.
About setting the trails. Early then, like I said, that half the island was untouched jungle.
Yeah.
Was it live trail? Did you prelay? Once you got through your first trail with Cohair, how much work went into recceing?
Oh, I think you probably certainly had to do at least one recce because in jungle it's easy to take the wrong turn even if you think your memory is great. So a couple of recces, but always laid before the run, and the hares never went round with the pack or anything of that nature. A few times I remember them getting screwed up when there was a hare and a cohair, and they said, I'll lay one half, you lay the other, and we'll meet on the Salita Reservoir, and then we'll get them to swim. They never met, and it was absolute chaos. And there's signs all around the Salita Reservoir, even in those days, saying, you do not swim in.
Right.
And everybody literally had to swim for their lives to get out and find their own way home. But we were all young then. Nobody worried about things like that.
And what do you remember during that period there, what you learned about hashing outside of Singapore?
The answer is that I knew about, for instance, the Hong Kong hash because I was also responsible for a business in Hong Kong. And I used to fly up there every 2 or 3 weeks. So I got the opportunity of not only hashing with the Singapore, but with the Hong Kong men's hash as well. In fact, I'm still in contact with a lot of the ex-Hong Kong hashers. And they get really annoyed, even though I go to all their functions, because even though they remember me and I attended to a lot of things, I never paid any subscriptions because I was always a visiting member.
Ah, good deal. How different was it? How different was Hong Kong hashing in Singapore?
Well, in those days, Hong Kong had two hashes. One called themselves in those days, they still do, in fact, the Gentlemen of Hong Kong. And then there was Kowloon hash, and there was only the ferries in those days. So the Monday night would hash mainly on Victoria Island, which is an average gradient, I would think, of about 1 in 3. It was just pain, pain, pain. I went on a few Kowloon hashes. They went out further into the new territory, which is more interesting. But that was it. In those days, they were great rivals. If you ran on Kowloon, you never ran with the men's hash and vice versa.
That's great.
Yeah.
What about you getting involved with mismanagement in that first 7 years of hashing?
I was appointed a joint master in 77, which was the year that I left. But Singapore, they've had since their founding only about 5 or 6 Grand Masters, because the intention is the Grand Master is like a ringmaster. He just makes sure that traditions are not broken and it doesn't go outside what we regard as hash parameters. Then the JMs ran it different years. So there would be election every year and new JMs would take over. It's very simple in those days. 2 JMs, a hash cash and on second, and a Grand Master. Not like about the 13 or 14 officials that most pitches seem to get today, including Surrey.
Why'd you leave in 77? Where'd you go next?
I went back to UK because very simply there were 4 expatriates in our business and they thought we were too expensive and we would appoint locals to take over the business. 18 months later, the business had gone bust.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. By this point, hashing is part of your life.
Yeah.
And something you figure you're going to do forever. What'd you find back in the UK?
The truth of the matter is, I didn't think I would find anything because at that time in the 70s, the hash was basically just in the Far East and occasionally in the Middle East as well. I had no idea whether in Europe, Western Europe, UK, there was any hashes at all. So came back and changed my job, and there was a lot of other things to think about. And somehow somebody told me that there was a hash called the Surrey hash. And I can't even remember how I tracked them down. I wrote a letter, my wife shouted out, I wrote a letter.
To somebody and they told us all about it.
Oh, okay. My dear wife's got a better memory than I have.
Nice.
She said that I wrote a letter and to somebody who gave us all the details. Extraordinarily enough, it turned out to have been started in 1975, 2 years before I got back, by an ex-Singapore hasher called Jim Raper. And I don't remember Jim. He left Singapore, I think, 68, something like that. But he'd been a very enthusiastic hasher. And when he got back, he started the Surrey hash exactly as you would expect in Singapore, still on yellow-headed paper, the normal formats, everything, a bucket afterwards after the run. But he struggled for membership because there wasn't really a catchment. So he acquired probably initially about a dozen runners. And to keep it going, he financed it himself, did the hash notice himself, put on lots of barbecues and events just to keep in contact with it. Almost a bribe to these people.
Yeah.
But it slowly built up. He was also a multi-millionaire. In Singapore, he'd done a lot of deals, property deals, which I wouldn't say were illegal, but very close to the line. And he made a lot of money. And then to make sure he kept his money, he married a Swiss millionairess as well. And we thought it was great. I think the subs were something like £5 a year or something because he forked up everything and he got his secretary to do the hash notice and all the rest. But he came notorious. Probably the name Jim Raper doesn't mean anything to you.
No, I've heard about him.
Oh, you have? Okay. Well, yeah, he was basically rigging the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And he was the first Brit to have a charge, was found guilty of manipulation and was told that he was unfit to become a director of a British public company. But that didn't really stop him. And he raided a British public company, which had lots of little old ladies investing their money in it. Then the police came looking for him, and he had very wisely decided that he would like to live in Monaco. And he had a hash there, would you believe? And he basically outran the British police, and from time to time had the nerve to come back and visit and run with us occasionally, because in those days, if you went to Ireland, there was no passport checks between Ireland and the UK. So we saw him from time to time, but it was a bit of a shock at the time. Not so much, we had a feeling that he was a bit dodgy, but everybody was glad to accept his money. It was just the fact that we had to do things ourselves. I and another guy, we wrote a constitution, which was very similar to the Singapore one, which ran to about half a page. In fact, one of the things on the Singapore Constitution said, and this is actually true, it said in this order, no dogs and women. And we needed a constitution because we couldn't open a bank account without it. Then we put in bankers' orders, and as I say, and then we had to write a hash notice ourselves, and it was a real pain. I did it for about 3 or 4 years. The classic thing, type something out, stick it on a bit of paper, put a few jokes in, take it to a local printer, get it run off, fold it, put stamps on it, and it's a real pain in those days. Thank God for the internet. Yeah.
Yeah. How did people find out where the next run was?
We had very simply just at the end, you had the receding hairline, and then at the top of the hash notice, there would be the hair, time, and where the venue was. And it was as simple as that. We were talking to each other anyway on previous Sundays. So if you knew the hair, he'd probably say where it was or whatever. Yeah.
Explain, did you run into issues where you would be in the UK and there would be, for people that haven't been there or hash there, the right of way issues, which is a way that people can go on private property? What was it like in the land?
We are lucky in the UK. We've got footpaths and rights of roam and all sorts of things in UK. Getting into the countryside and laying a trail is absolutely no problem in UK. That doesn't mean we don't have problems with trespassing, but that's mainly because if you can see the pack on the other side of a field, rather than run around it, you're inclined to jump across the gates and come out the other side to save your legs. But we've had a few run-ins with farmers where frightened cattle and annoyed sheep and all that sort of business. But that was our choice rather than running into any real trespassing. We've got, in Surrey, it's quite a big county, and we've got probably 80% is still open countryside. So we are never restricted by where we can run. Parking is a bigger problem than finding the venue.
Yeah. Did you hash regularly with anybody else at the beginning? And how long did it take to find other clubs?
The answer is yes. We saw an advert, for instance, the Barnes hash, and we thought we would go along because they advertised. They said the first run was so and I think about 3 people turned up, and so we thought we'd breathe some life into it. So we went along. In those days, Barnes are just really near a common, and so Surrey used to, not all of Surrey, but a fair number would go along and support them. But we just got fed up with them running around the same areas. But by that time, they had built up their own membership, and it was quite a young membership. And there was also a lot of very attractive young ladies who joined as well. So it came almost a marriage bureau rather than a hash.
Great. We can jump to where we met. The people that have been interhashing a long time might have been in Limassol, Cyprus, 96, and put on one of the biggest costume choreographed number of bodies on stage. It was a Surrey Barnes production. How did that come to be?
The answer is that lots of barns in those days liked to run with Surrey. So we had almost I wouldn't say a cross exchange of membership, but there were a lot of barns who ran with Surrey, and that's how it all came about, really. And we'd already tried that cabaret out at one of the away hashes, not in such great numbers, but we had, fortunately, an American couple, a guy called Rambo and his lady called Rambina. And he was secretary, and he suddenly took the hash notice from one sheet to about 5 sheets of absolute pornography. And we used to get complaints from postmen who were reading some of this stuff, putting it through and threatening us. But his wife was a choreographer as well. She taught us a load of the moves and so forth. So that's really how it evolved. So we were lucky to get a professional to knock us into shape, so to speak.
And we're talking about the Rocky Horror performance. And
Yeah.
What was your role in?
I was the narrator, but initially they had intended doing it just as a number to the music. And I said, no, you need to have a bit of a story. I wrote a script based on having watched the film, based on it, but changed a lot of the lines so that they were hash orientated. And the only thing I would say was that I was happy to do it live, but they knew that I'm notorious for ad-libbing. So they made me record it on a tape, and I just lip synced it over that. So that's
I remember going up there and the tape starting from the very beginning, but it guaranteed that, well, didn't guarantee anything. We've had lots of technical failures in situations like that, But it was a big hit. And of course, let's do the time warp again. You got to do a second run through. It brought down the house.
Yeah, and I think also we did it on the closing night as well, if I remember. But I think if my memory also serves me right, some of the girls got out of control, and didn't the band end up stark naked except in their socks?
Yeah, we were enclosed. It had cloth paper around the whole venue, and people weren't peeping over the walls like they have at some of the other places. And the rules weren't in effect there so much. What about packing that out? Everybody have their own gear?
No, basically Rambina, the choreographer, she basically worked out what the costumes should be. I'm sure you remember they were extremely raunchy, to say the least. And in fact, the guy that played the guy who was built with all the muscles, and that was Rainbow, actually. That was her husband. And I was going to say, I think he had lots of fun on the stage, if I remember.
Yeah. Actually, that hash named Rambo is one of the most common. There's probably at least 7 or 8. So people can go back and look at the pictures and figure out if they know that Rambo or another one.
He went back after about 2 or 3 years back, I don't know, to Houston or something. He was an oily.
All right. I want to ask you to go back and think about before Cyprus, what hash traveling you did once you got back to the UK, international events and UK events and stuff like that. What about those regional events? When did they start?
I was at the first Interhash in 1978 because when I used to go up to the Hong Kong hash, I knew that they were thinking about doing this. I got a job with a multinational, and I was given a whole list of things that needed to be sorted out globally. And they said, where do you want to start? I just happened to decide that I had some projects in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Kuala Lumpur. I went along to the first one, which was absolutely terrific because nobody had any idea what it really meant at all. It was just made up on the spot. It was a terrific event, absolutely terrific. In those days, most of the senior police were Europeans, and they actually put out an instruction to all the police stations that if any hashers got into trouble, they were not to be arrested. They were just to be taken quietly to the police station and telephone calls made so that they were quietly led away, so to speak.
That's great. Do you remember anything about the controversy where Hong Kong decided to do it and KL wasn't really happy about it?
No, that they weren't. But that was John Duncan. Duncan complained. Oh, Duncan. Duncan complained, and he's no more, sadly. But if he wasn't singing, he was complaining. Because they were the mother hash, he clearly felt that they should have had first throw. But it was Hong Kong that thought about it and got on and do it. And it was a joint venture with Kowloon Hash as well. So they put together a very good event and then gracefully handed it over to KL, including a lot of excess money as well. So he had no reason to complain at all.
Yeah, they just didn't get number one. They've hosted it a few times since then. And the big anniversary, another big 10-year anniversary coming up that I know they're going to have some kind of event in 2028.
I never know in KL who's organizing because they get so fractious amongst themselves. As a hash runs from the dog, who they claim it is the mother hash, and then there's the mother hash who says they're the mother hash, and then they're surrounded by other hashes, and the majority of the membership are Chinese, and they seem to have a great joy in arguing amongst themselves.
Yeah. Let me just divert real quickly to your personal life with your spouse.
Yeah.
How did you meet her at all at hashing? Has she been a hasher?
No, I met her in the 60s, and I then went off to South Africa, a business transfer. And I had a short time there, and then I came up to East Africa, and we were there 3.5 years. And she came up. We got married within a week of her arrival because the immigration authorities were going to deport her. I'd only known her a few months before. Anyway, we're celebrating our 60th anniversary next January. I must have done something right in my life.
Yeah, congratulations. Where is she hashed?
She started the Harriets in Singapore in 73, mainly because she got fed up. Initially, when I joined the hash, we would go to a local shop house and have some chop suey or whatever and a lot of beer. But I'd come home in reasonable hours. But the more I got into the hash, got back later, and she seemed to think that we were having all the fun and so forth. And so she thought she would give it a try, but it was mainly against the wishes of the whole Singapore men's. They were very anti-women hashing. And John O'Rourke, who, in addition to being my flying instructor, was a friend of mine as well. And he did everything possible to stop the ladies hashing, but a few of them decided to help out and took Carol and another lady to show her how to lay a run. For the first few runs, they went round with the ladies because in those days, lots of kampong dogs. And so they needed. She started it and basically ran it until she left with me in 77. And it's still going, although we were back last year and all of the Singapore hashes, all the numbers are diminished. I went to the Singapore men's officials dinner and there were only about 20 people there. And there was no change in committee because there was no people to change it over to it. And on the Singapore Harriets, we went on a run and I think there were 9 on 10. And that was mainly kept going by the husband of one of the Harriets. And it's a great shame because there were big numbers, but they've now got, I think, about 6 or 7 hashes on the island, and they're all struggling. The only one that we were amazed on, which is thriving, is called the dog hash. I never came across it, but as far as I'm concerned, dogs on hashes, let them go to crufts, not on the hash.
All right, let's talk about any other memorable events and regular events after 78 Hong Kong first Interhash. How has been your international and national travel, and how much of those are part of your hashing life?
In terms of Interhash, I've been to all of them except for in about the last 3 or 4. I haven't been on those. Shall we say old age and a certain element of repetition has blunted my appetite for numbers like 600 or 700. You just can't get around these numbers. Up to about 2000 and I think 10, 12, I've been to, I think, pretty well all of the interhashes. But they did actually not force me, but I was so inspired in the early ones that when I came back to UK, I decided that we should have a UK NASH hash. I was taking the Surrey hash up to the Cambridge hash, which were just their 100th. And we were based in a pub by the river. And if there's a microphone, it's very dangerous because I am inclined to get hold of it and say some weird and wonderful things. But at that time, I said something on the lines that, it's about time the UK had its own NASH hash, and I'm going to organise it. And 6 months later, I thought, I've just said that. Nobody remembers, but people kept on reminding me, and that's how we organised the first UK hash in 1981. And that was the same as it is over the August bank holiday. But we had a very much a countryside venue. Would you believe it cost £5 in those days? And we did our own catering on an army field kitchen. There was a semi-derelict house there that had been taken over by a couple of East End brothers who didn't know quite what to do with it. They were thinking that perhaps they'd turn it into a pub or something. And they agreed that we could use their house and set up a bar there, and we brought in a couple of dozen barrels of beer, and then after the first day we had to get onto the brewery and bring in another, and we got through huge amounts of beer, and amazingly enough, I can't believe it, 100 bottles of whiskey. We had a great time, and I remember it mainly because it was so enjoyable that the Cambridge hash borrowed £100 off the Surrey hash and said, we're going to stay there for another week,
Uh,
of which they did, spent their £100 and then had to borrow money off the brothers because they got no money to get home.
that's fantastic. How did that work at the beginning in the UK NASH hash? What did you think would happen subsequently on the schedule, frequency, and everything? And I'm curious about the serving. Was it all self-serve beers and the whiskey bottles just set out? How did that all?
But the beer we served ourselves and the whiskey we entrusted to the brothers.
Then it was the future. Like, for example, with the Inter-Africas, they were
Yeah.
hosting it in Ethiopia right after Cyprus, just saying, we're going to give all these guys who couldn't get a visa and travel to Cyprus the idea of an international event. And then by the end of the weekend, somebody said, we'll do another one. What did you have in mind? You planned it as an all UK event. How did it go to select next host?
In those days, in the early days, certainly Cambridge, where I'd announced it and come and stayed that extra week, they couldn't wait to take it over. So they did the next one. And then I think it was the Wessex. There was no lack of volunteers, the first 5 or 6. And we knew each other so much better because we were relatively young. And being young, and there weren't all that many hashes in the UK. So we were happy to travel to support them and vice versa. And it was much easier, and there was a really good grapevine. But now there's so many hashes in the UK, but we're all getting old together and people don't want to travel so much, or if they do, they just turn up for the beer and a short walk and that sort of thing. So the hash has got no choice, is it? We're getting old, and so we've got to adjust. But anyway, we still enjoy ourselves, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, the UK NASH hash has had a couple where almost nobody's stepping up, and somebody puts their hand up at the last second at the meeting.
No, I would say that's not been a problem because I was going to say we've got so many, and these days you can get professional caterers in. You can take a public school over in the holidays, and it's a lot of work, but the infrastructure is all there. When we did the first one, we literally did everything, but now you can subcontract a lot of the stuff, whether it's t-shirts or catering, or it's only the runs, isn't it? And working out the volume of the beer. And you obviously support your local breweries. It's not really been a problem in that sense. The only thing is the cost has gone up. I'm going to the latest one, and that is £280 a head.
Yeah.
It's starting with £5. So
there's a lot that have been all tent based, lodging included. So there's a lot more logistics that cost money. Yeah.
And you can't really risk completely tents, particularly in the UK. The weather is so unpredictable, and you need big numbers. I think there's 700 down for the coming UK NASH hash. You've got to have a big enough either tent or a big enough ballroom or something in the school to take all those people. Tenting is not really practical for big events. It's all right for celebrations, I guess, but the weather is always a question mark.
Do you remember when it exploded in terms of international visitors?
I would say no. I would. Surrey are a bit. If it was the London hash, I bet they would answer you. They get regular visitors because they're near the airport. Not so far as Surrey. We're probably about 30 miles out of Surrey, and we always are in the countryside. So it's not a matter of jumping on a bus or a train. You need a car. So we don't get too many international visitors. We get people who've hashed overseas and come along. Some stick with us, and others it's just a one-off visit, and that's it. We don't see them again.
Let's just talk about Interhash, because this year coming up there was only the team in Indonesia doing it in 2026. And I can tell you, we had just got, Kenya has a put together team and a put together plan, and they're going to bid, and there's a couple other people. Now we have an Interhash council making sure their bid is not just one guy doing something. What about the course of all those Interhashes in terms of, you got the version of John Duncan there, you got a lot of big personalities and organizers of events. What's been your experience over the years of Interhash?
Basically, all the ones I've been to have been very well organized. If you go to Australia or New Zealand, they are by nature organizers. They get good weather, and somehow, particularly in New Zealand, when they had the hash in Rotorua, I think they must have rounded up every old coach on the island for transport and so forth, and then got the Women's Institute to put on food and all. They're fabulous organizers. The only one that I think that was a complete and utter failure in the sense of the organizers was in Kuching, where, was it, 3 Chinese hashes fell out, and I think eventually the tourist board had to pick it up. But I love Kuching anyway. It reminds me of Singapore in the 70s, on the river and the shop houses. So I wasn't too fussed about that. And also, we had come, I don't know if you're aware, there was a hash called the vodka train.
Oh, yeah, sure. And I didn't go on it, but yeah, I know the organizers.
So we went all the way from St. Petersburg to Moscow, all across Russia, Mongolia, and then China, all by local trains. From there, we flew to KL, did some hashing there, and then on to Kuching. It was a hell of a trip. So we weren't fussed about what happened in Kuching. But other than that, I think they've been organized, although I can't speak for the last 4 or 5. Didn't Fiji cancel because of COVID, or was
that was Trinidad? Fiji was okay, and they're trying to start a Pan-Pacific event now. I think they'd like to host some more events. Yeah. It's a tradition that has managed, apart from COVID and a bit of stumbles right around then, to maintain itself every 2 years. UK NASH Hash is another of those events. He's mentioned how clubs that used to have an expat base, long-termers and rotators in, there's just not the generator of those kind of participants. So some of the hashes are booming in South Asia with locals. They've been taken over and run that way. And perhaps some of the local culture bickering is part of the culture now. But what do you think about all that in terms of the aging of the hash and how the future prospects of, we've lost countries in war zones. There's no hash in Syria. I've hashed in Damascus several times over the years. It's gone. Lebanon's hanging in there, but what do you think about all that?
Oh, crikey. That was a long question. I've forgotten the first.
Yeah, it's just the international hashing and the change over time.
Firstly, I don't think we're ever going to go back to a completely agreed interhash because, as you rightly say, in the Far East, they're changing very rapidly to local hashes. Trying to get a work permit in Singapore these days is extremely difficult. So expatriates are fairly thin on the ground. It took us enough effort to get the Cardiff interhash, but there is no way ordinary Filipinos or Indonesians or Malaysians are going to be able to afford to go to the UK and pay UK prices. So I don't think you're ever going to get a complete cohesion in terms of just one interhash. And I think where was it that Kenya put on us interhash in rivalry to?
Yeah, they lost the bid. They put a hash on in Mombasa, and now they are bidding to put on 2028 in Mombasa.
Yeah. I've met some of the Nairobi hash, and they are a crazy bunch, but they're good organizers. They are good organizers. And of course, I lived there a long time before they around, but they are strong characters. And they are also, because they're hashes, they got money. That means they're middle class and they've got connections to all sorts of other people, so they can get access to sites and all sorts of things. You know how these things work in third world countries. It's not necessarily the money, it's the contacts you've got who own stores. So,
Yeah, okay. You like the microphone, years of write-ups, you've kept the t-shirts, and what are you doing these days, and when do you hash now?
No, I was going to say, I've always supported Surrey. I started hashing in 77, and other than when on holidays or, for instance, I've just had a new hip. I'm 3 months into a new left hip, but almost without exception, my wife and I are out every Sunday. Surrey hash is now very much an aging hash, so I reckon we probably get 70 to 80% people walking, but they still lay say a 3 or 4 mile trail. We've actually got some 80-year-olds who are still running properly, would you believe?
That's
But
great.
we are an aging hash, but notwithstanding, I would say that our social side is pretty strong. We get good support in the pub, and after the run, there is the traditional bucket and the circle and so forth. So in that sense, it's going well, but we have to judge for Anni Domini. It is there whether we like it or not. I am a devotee of hashing. I just like the attitude of the people, and I would say probably 95% of my friends are hashers or ex-hashers, because I still keep in touch with ex-Hong Kong hashers and when I'm in Singapore, go along, and we've got a Singapore Old Farts group as well. And you talked about, for instance, places they don't have hashes like Tehran, but a friend of mine runs a very successful ex-Tehran hash group that meets regularly up for lunches and tells each other how great they are and the same old stories, but everybody still loves going along. It's just comfortable being with hashers as far as I'm concerned. They're good people.
What have you done in terms of designing t-shirts and some of that arts and stuff? You like to talk, you like to write. Did you do any of that stuff?
I've done a lot of magazines and that sort of thing, and that's just damn hard work, going through old hash notices and picking out all the stuff and so forth. But that can be done online these days. But it's a hell of a lot of work, and I prefer these days at 85 not to do that. In t-shirts, we've got somebody who does that haberdashery, but I would say it's less controversial. If it's celebrating a number, there normally be a number on the back and the name of the hash. Whereas I like to have t-shirts which annoyed people. For instance, when we went to the Rotorua hash, we had on the front who we were, and on the back in really bold letters, it said, "We love Kiwis." And then it showed a picture of it. The Kiwi doesn't exist any longer. It's got an arrow through it and it's on a barbecue. Yeah, and I don't know how many times people tried to buy these t-shirts off us, but we weren't selling at all.
You're aware of the iteration of the Hash Museum in KL, right?
Yeah, I haven't seen the new building. I didn't go out to it, but I gather from the photographs it's getting pretty close to completion. But it's not the same as the Dog. That men's bar in the Dog is, to my, when I was based there in Singapore, I was also responsible for Malaysia. So I'd be up there every 2 or 3 weeks. And before I went to the airport, the company driver would take me to the Dog or some other very well-known drinking hole for expatriates. And it was home from home. In those days, all the clubs have reciprocal rights. I'm still a member of the Singapore Cricket Club, and they've got reciprocal rights for clubs all around the world. So it's great. And it amuses my wife because it says ladies are not allowed to buy drinks at the men's bar, and they've got a white line, but it's only 2 yards from the bar. And then they got the tables and chairs, and she thinks that's great because she doesn't have to go to the bar, and I can keep filling up glass. And I think they've changed it anyway. The men's bar, I think, now has just been open to women as well. Have you been along to the new clubhouse?
No, I haven't been. I will expect to get there in 28 for their anniversary event. I was last in KL for 2018 when they had that anniversary hash. Still, Merdeka Stadium is still standing. Every time I go there, they say we're tearing it down this year. but it's still standing.
And it's a disgusting save.
It is.
My wife was terrified when she went to the ladies' toilets and there were just rats running around. They should have pulled it down years ago. You won't recognise KL. It's just virtually spread all the way to Ipoh and almost hasn't got quite to Penang, but it's absolutely huge now. But they've got good transport systems and the food is great and the people are really nice. So it's a good place to go.
You're at 85, so you definitely know some people who have gone on and started before you did that have gone on. There's no one left who's attended all the Interhashes. Now we're coming up on 25, 26. Yeah.
I thought there were only 4 that was ended.
There had been, at one point there was 5. Horader dropped out in protest. He was the first guy who voluntarily said, I'm not going, I'm against it. And Goa, there was some unhappiness with how things were going. I think he regretted that, but then, yeah, Chibai and...
I think Drano likes to claim he's been to them, but I haven't.
He has been to them all until the Trinidad didn't happen. I don't think he made it to Goa. We had an event in Goa just thrown again, but he had been to, and Chibai was in Fiji. They were all in Fiji. And of course, the wolf died on trail. He had been, while he was alive, to all of them. Those were the guys that were the survivors. But it's turned out there's a girl called June who says she has been to them all. And we're going to track her down next one and see what's going on with that.
First one in Hong Kong, I'd be surprised.
There were some ladies there, right?
Very few, because it was mainly from the Far East. In those days, they were all men only. So I would be very surprised. I don't remember any ladies actually being in the China Fleet Club. It was all men, and even the one in Jakarta, there must have been some ladies because my wife was there. And I know that there were hardly any from Western Europe because I was the first person to take a group of Surrey Hash. We were the first from Europe to attend Interhash.
Wow. Yeah. Neat. Let me ask you about some of the other things that have become more or less hash traditions and how you thought about them or interact with them. We've got red dress runs. We've got white powder scares. What's your thoughts on those?
No, we continue to lay our runs on flour, and nobody has tried to arrest us for anthrax or terrorism or anything. Although I notice on some of them in the States, they deserve to get. I think, didn't they run through a store or something?
It was an IKEA parking lot and right up in front of the gates. Yeah, New Haven, Connecticut. That's the most infamous. There were expenses and fundraising and lawyers, and it all ended okay. But yeah.
And I must admit, I've fallen out of love with the red dress runs. I find them particularly boring and almost a duplication. And I think that's reflected because if you go to events now, the number of people that take part in the red dress run, I think even on the UK NASH hash, the number of people signed up for the red dress run is quite small compared to the rest. I think the rest of us think we're putting money into other charities anyway, and it's come a bit predictable, so less interest, I think.
It's been great talking to you and catching the history is just fantastic. How's it feel to have created the UK NASH Hash, an event that's running over 40 years later?
I feel quite proud of it, but it hasn't really registered with other hashes of take. You go along to a UK NASH hash, and if it comes up, and say, yeah, I was the founder. And they say, oh, yes, how nice. And just.
No, personally, there are only so many big continental and big national events that have run through a couple millennia and 5-6 decades. I was in Egypt for a long time, and I didn't travel that much out of that region and just close by, but I went to Speyside. So I appreciate that you founded it, and that's a great event that's going to last forever is hashing, I think.
The only thing I appreciate out of that is because lots of people, as I said, just shrug it off or think I'm bullshitting. And fortunately, somebody wrote a book about it, how it evolved and so forth. And fortunately, that's been preserved online. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
I don't know, how recently was that done?
Oh, that was done a good 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing. I haven't gone back to look at it, but I've looked
So
at that in years.
anybody argues, I just refer them to the book. We just, I'm going to the UK NASH. A lot of the organisers are as long in the tooth as I am, and they know I'm founder, but there's been no mention, oh, that's great, or come over and declare it open, or anything like that, or whatever. I know, I think on the hash, just people move on. Also, there's an awful lot of people like me around who organised other major events or even big events with their own hash. So we're not unique in that sense. I think hashers generally are pretty good organisers.
Yeah, there are so many people, and almost everybody gets a chance to contribute at whatever level they can. Personally, I like the idea of a founder is there of recognize it. I like that little bit because personally, I think that's a history that a lot of young hashers actually are pretty keen on. The people that met John Duncan and Horst Thompson will talk about it today.
Yeah.
I think that's a kind of important thing that people would, even though it's not such a big deal, but it's something you are proud of. I like that ceremonial announcement and make sure people know personally. So I hope they do it.
All I was going to say is I wish those youngsters would stick around. We get youngsters from time to time, but there are so many other things that youngsters want to do. You don't get the same loyalty to the hash. It's always the same people who are organising events through the year. And we're all in our late 70s or early 80s, and we do it because basically nobody else wants to do it. So I wish a few of those youngsters would stick. And there's different attitudes. They're not so keen on downs and alcohol and all that sort of thing, or they think it actually is a race. You've got to understand the hash mentality. It is a mentality, and it can get a bit rough at times. And in a circle, if somebody says some harsh words about them in a jokey sense, sometimes they take it very seriously.
The world has changed a lot in 54 years since you started hashing, but hashing's still here, and a lot of it's to your credit of going through and starting and thinking that it's a good thing that you found. How long did you fly?
I flew 7.5 years because when I came back, I thought I've got a Singapore flying license. I'll just transfer it to a UK license. But in the UK, you can't do that. You've got to start from scratch. And it's very expensive to learn to start flying in the UK. Plus the fact that we live near Gatwick and Heathrow airports, and they're all controlled airspace and all the rest of it. There's no fun. I let it go, unfortunately.
Yeah. We talk about New Zealand, everything, and on vacation there, one NASH hash, they'll let you co-pilot a plane. Anybody can go up, and once you do that, you can take the next course and do a barrel roll with them. And the little planes that fly themselves, they'll let you go take those up.
Yeah. Anyway, I've got my logbook and wings to prove it, even though it's a long time ago.
It's been great talking to you. I think we are going to, after your wife listens to this, maybe she'll agree to do a podcast of her own on the founding of the Singapore Harriettes.
Yeah, if you'd like to send a little invitation, I'm sure she will be delighted. She hasn't got the same instincts for the microphone as I have, but that's probably because she knows one is enough in the family.
Is she there?
Yeah, I can give her a shout. Yeah.
Yeah.
The boss is just coming up.
Great.
Way up the stairs.
Sit down, darling, and say hello.
Hello, Rob.
Hi. I'd really like to interview you about your whole hashing. Not right now, but I'd do a whole session with you. But just as a spouse of Uncle Gerry there, tell us your hash name. And you're not quite what we call bottom feeders. We have this term for people who are couples that met on the hash. We call them bottom feeders. But you guys have had a long marriage that hashing has been a big part of. But just tell us the story of your hash name and how you got it.
Oh, it was Mrs. G, G for Gurney. And when we initially started hashing, 77, wasn't it?
Yeah.
One of the guys always used to say good morning to me. He was very polite. And he used to say Mrs. G. So when everybody started getting hash names, I thought, I'll have that one.
Nice. You started the Singapore Harriet, so I'm sure there's a story there. It wasn't unanimously supported, but you managed to get it, and it's still running today as far as,
The last contact I had was when we were in Singapore a couple of years ago, I think it was. And we actually did the hash run, but it was only about 5 or 6 of us. It was really struggling. And unfortunately, they do all their hash notices or information on Facebook. And I'm not on Facebook. And I have done sent photographs and done a couple of emails, but I've had no reply.
Let's just book a session, something like in a week or so, where you and I can sit down and just talk memories and stories of hashing. That'd be great.
So what are you going to do with all this hash information?
So I just published them. There are a lot of hashers who don't travel and some who do, who just, they'll listen to it while they're exercising. So that's what, or while they're driving. I'll tell you one funny thing that happens is I'll go to a little event with 100 or 200 people, and I'll be talking to someone and they'll say, I recognize your voice from somewhere. And we've never met. I'll do a little bit of talking here, but yeah, it's fun. And I really enjoy it. You can't get to every place. I've only been to one UK NASH hash. My wife's been to a couple, but it's also a great way to meet hashers now that we are all connected.
Yep. We're doing the NASH hash in Twickenham.
Yeah, Twickenham.
Yep, this year. But we haven't done one for quite a while. But you said the hash for us, it's our family.
Yeah.
We do have brothers and sisters. We're not really.
They're not all they're not hashers, so yeah.
So it's our family, and we're out every Sunday.
Yeah, that's great. Do you know about the Hash Founders Club?
No.
Okay, I'll talk to this guy and see if he wants to send you a hat with a number on it. And it's like Uncle Gerry. He's proud of being involved with founding the UK NASH hash. It's not always recognized, but people that founded any club are an important part of hashing history. So I may get a guy called Eiffel Tower to get in contact with you and get on the log of, we just track who founded hashes and so on.
One time we were in KL, Kuala Lumpur, they did the hash family genealogy, and they had it on trestle tables, and it went on and on and on.
Yeah, Tumbling Bill, I knew him well, and I've seen, and I think I had a copy of the printout. It's now online, and it is online. I think we have a photo of some of that original long dot matrix printed out genealogy, and a guy called Hazukashi is maintaining it in the online. There's a lot of gaps and holes, but that was a big project, and the guy's name was Tumbling Bill, and that was a passion of him, to collect.
You talk to so many people, but I remember somebody telling me he's going to put it all online, so perhaps that's who it is.
Yeah, I think if you go to something like Hash Heritage or something, but I'll send it by email if that we can. I'll see what kind of shape it's in, and it is there. It's not as impressive as the table full paper.
Nice talking to you.
Thanks. I'll talk to you again.
You mentioned drain oil, and it suddenly brought on a memory of a hash story. One of the Hong Kong hashers is a multi-millionaire.
Oh, yeah.
Came over here and he said he wanted to meet ex-Hong Kong hashers. He was staying at the Ritz, and he said, come along at the Ritz. So we went along at the Ritz. There's this lovely room, and there's petit fours and all champagne and all the rest of it. And he then gets a call from Drain Oil, and he said, come along. Okay, Draynor said he'll come along. And then we find that when he gets to the door of the Ritz, he's turned up in a hash t-shirt and a kukoi, and they won't let him in. And the management said, look, we're used to lending ties out, but we can't lend you a pair of trousers and a shirt. So there's a pub across the road. And as a result, everybody felt sorry for him. So we left the Ritz with all this free champagne and food and all the rest to go and stand next to him in this dirty, scruffy pub so that he had company. My wife, Carol, was not amused at all.
That's a great story because everybody who's met Drain Oil at a hash knows that's what he wears.
I haven't seen him for a long time over here. I think he spends most of his time in Malaysia now, doesn't he?
I'll check in with him and tell him I talked to you.
You also mentioned Benfield. Hasn't he passed away recently?
Yeah, Horator passed away a few years ago.
Yeah, I thought it was,
Yeah. He had returned. He did a protest non-attendance of one Interhash.
Yeah.
I don't remember if he went to Cardiff, but certainly Chiang Mai, he was there and he was like, yeah, what was I thinking?
Yeah. Yeah, he makes me look like an amateur when he gets hold of the microphone. He was terrific.
Yeah, he was a great guy, a great hasher. And for a long time, he signed off every email with on forever. And that's a popular phrase now for people to use.
Yeah.
I'll get this out before the UK NASH Hash. So hopefully people have it out. More part of the tagline will be founder of the UK NASH Hash. Thanks for your time and all the stories today, Uncle Gerry.
Okay, I was going to say, I'm glad that Shakes told me of your existence. And I also saw your name on the April edition of the 100 well-known people and so forth.
Not so well known, but yeah, I'm glad we connected too.
Yeah. Anyway, good to talk to you and thanks for all your time.
Yeah, on.
On, as they say.
To close the circle, here's the Hash Anthem sung by Mother Hash.
Swing low, sweet child.